Layla and Majnun is a well-known compilation of poems from ancient times. The poems were put together by a Persian poet called Nizami. Nizami collected the poems and composed a story which was then translated in German by an Islamic scholar named Rudolf Gelbke. The English translation would then later come. The story of Layla and Majnun has been told and sculpted in many ways. Nizami himself added a few parts that can't be found in the original poems. I first heard about this story researching a song called Layla written by Eric Clapton and Jim Gordon. Eric heard the story through a friend named Abdul Qadir as-Sufi. The story of Layla and Majnun is as tragic as Romeo and Juliet. The version I read is about 53 chapters and 212 pages with a postscript from Rudolf Gelbke. The story begins with Said, a man of great power and respect among his tribe of Banu Amir. The Said longs for a child and begs Allah to give him a son so that he may succeed him. His wish is granted and a boy is born. He names the boy Qais. Qais is taken care of and sheltered. He is later sent to school to learn. One day a girl from a different tribe joins his class. Upon seeing her, he instantly falls in love. Qais and Layla take notice of each other and stare at each other throughout their learning days. Qais first tries to keep his love a secret, but people notice. Rumors are spread, and Qais is labeled madman or Majnun in Arabic. Once her tribe finds out what is being spread, Layla's parents take her out of school. Qais, now Majnun, gets a bit crazy. He tries to go to her camp during the nights to hopefully spot her. Sometimes he'll take his friends. He's able to stare her down one day, but flees, fearing her tribe or anybody watching. Majnun then starts fleeing to the wilderness to be alone. Said, feeling bad for his son, takes some of his men, and they leave for Layla's tribe to try and win over her parents so that he may marry her. Layla's father declines the offer and states that he does not want a madman for his son-in-law. It would only shame him and his tribe. Majnun finds out what has been said about him and goes into a low state of mind. His father then tries to take him to Mecca so that he may ask God to rid him of this love. Instead of following his dad's direction and asking to rid of this love for Layla, Majnun begs God to have love consume him. When Majnun returns, he goes back into the wilderness and his father gives up. While Majnun is in deep depression, so is Layla. The problem with Layla is she feels like a prisoner, being a woman in her time. She feels that she is trapped in her custom. She cries herself to sleep and tells no one of the sadness deep within. She keeps on a normal face, but she is truly broken and in need for her love. Qais. During this night, Majnun begins to sing and do poetry from afar for his love. The poems move people and soon words get to Layla. Layla replies a few times by writing poems herself. And for a while, this is how they communicate. People recognize that the two lovers are Layla and Majnun. The poems about Layla circulate the Arab world, and a young reputable man named Ibn Salam asks for Layla's hand. Her father takes a liking to Ibn Salam, but tells him that it's not her time yet. Ibn Salam leaves, and we're brought back to Majnun, who is found by a young Arab leader named Nawfal. Nawfal is named to be a demon in the battlefield, but a kind heart for those he feels bad for. Nawfal hears about Majnun's situation and promises that he will help Majnun win his love by any means necessary. Majnun's faith is once again restored. Majnun starts eating again and joins the men. After a while, Majnun confronts Nawfal for not getting to his promise. Nawfal, feeling guilty, leads his men to Layla's tribe. He sends a messenger and gives Layla's tribe an ultimatum. Either you hand over Layla or he'll come to take her by force. The tribe refuses and the men go into battle. Majnun feels hurt by what's happening before him but can't do anything. Majnun even starts having thoughts of her tribe beating his friends and Nawfal. The battle shortly ends and a temporary truce is held. Upon finding out that the tribe will be gaining a reinforcement, Nawfal calls his allies from all of Arabia. Nawfal's men overwhelm the tribe and their companions, and the tribe gives up. Layla's father is then approached by Nawfal, and he begs them not to give his daughter to Majnun. Her father even mentions that he'd rather behead his daughter than for Majnun to receive her. Nawfal and his men eventually leave Layla to her father because they feel somewhat guilty and have grown to despise Majnun. Majnun flees Nawfal and his men. no longer to see them again. Majnun goes back to the wilderness where he becomes obsessed with rescuing animals from hunters. One day a creative but poor woman approaches him. He noticed that she keeps her man in shackles. She tells him that she gets sympathy and donations by doing so. Majnun begs her to put the shackles on him because he feels more fit for the role. She takes him to Layla's tribe and he throws a fit and leaves. Majnun's love for Layla gains even more attention as he recedes into the wilderness. Layla becomes even more famous due to the last events. Ibn Salam, fearing that Layla might be taken by another man, goes back and reasons to her father. Layla's father finally gives her away to Ibn Salam. Layla protects her virginity and distances herself from Ibn Salam. Ibn Salam becomes impatient and tries to force himself onto her, but she hits him and threatens him to touch her again. Majnun hears about his love being married and sinks deep. Said notices his final days are close as he becomes weaker, so he treks to find his son once more. He begs Majnun to come back and spend his final days with his son. Majnun first starts to cooperate, showing respect and empathy for his old man, but eventually turns his father down. Majnun's father gives up and withers away once he gets back home. Majnun finds that his father is no longer around and runs to his grave and cries for him. Majnun heads back to the wilderness where he has been accepted and followed by wild animals. The animals protect Majnun and follow his orders. One day his uncle Salim comes to visit his beloved nephew, but is soon turned away. Salim then goes back home to bring back Majnun's mother. Majnun's mother also begs for his return, as his father pleaded with him before, but Majnun declines. His mother dies, and Majnun hears about it later through Salim and runs to her grave and grieves over it. Later, a man who befriends Layla takes a letter to Majnun. In the letter, Layla speaks to her love and tells him she's aware of his condition and she made it so no man will ever touch his beloved. Majnun then replies in a somewhat distasteful mood. Layla longs to see Majnun, so with the help of her new friend, they set up a meeting. During the meeting, Layla asks Majnun to read some of his poems. Majnun reads his poems for her and flees back into the desert. Majnun continues to live in the wilderness with his wild animals until a young traveler from Baghdad comes to him and asks if he could live with him and write down some of his beautiful poems. Majnun eventually lets him in, but the young man ends up leaving because of the harsh living conditions and Majnun's lack of eating or care for life. Layla's husband Ibn Salam falls ill and decides to not listen to his doctor's recommendations as he recovers. This leads to his death. His death allows Layla for the first time to grieve publicly, not for Salam, but for Majnun. Layla is to be widowed for 2 years following Arab customs. The aftermath of Ibn Salam's demise frees Layla for the first time in her life. She soon falls ill herself and passes away. Majnun hears of his love's death and bolts to her. He cries at her grave and decides to go back into the wilderness with his animals. He eventually rushes back and just stays there, crying all day and night while his animals surround it and protect him. Majnun begs God to bring him and his love together in death and passes away after his last wish. People don't notice. No one visits Layla's grave because of the scary wild animals. Once Majnun decomposes and his bones are left, the animals eventually leave their master, and people finally realize Majnun is no longer. People mourn for Majnun and his tragic journey on this earth. Layla and Majnun felt quite realistic to me, as I am somewhat familiar with some of the customs in Islam and the Arab world. I would highly recommend that you read this story. It can feel repetitive at times though. I love the poems and the little stories told within this story. Although this is a love story, there is a lot to be gained in some life lessons. I can see why Eric Clapton named his song Layla. His Layla was Pattie Boyd, who was at the time married to his friend George Harrison from the Beatles, and he was Majnun. He showed Pattie the song and she rejected his love. Eric hit his low after the second rejection and for 4 years dealt with heroin addiction, trapped in the wilderness that exists in his heart. He would soon get Pattie Boyd after she became distant with her husband, and you know the rest is history. This love story reminds us that love at its extremes is stronger than armies of men, but it can also be depressing and suffocating. Let us all love like Qais and not end up Majnun.